All right, so this presentation is on OSINT101 from name to dossier. If that wasn't enough to get your attention, the alternative title is How We Doxed an Executive and Kept Our Jobs. As the image with all the cameras here might suggest, if you still have any illusion of online privacy, that may be about to be shattered. All right, so my name's Warren Moynihan. Presenting with me today are Chris Shepard and Dimitri Brioza. Us, along with other team members, are the IBM X-Force Ethical Hacking Team. Our day-to-day job involves performing penetration tests on IBM security products, but every once in a while we get to do a cool research project too, and this is one from last year. Oh, just a second, sorry. Everything we're about to say is our own opinion and not necessarily that of IBM, IBM Security, IBM X-Force, or any products or services we may have direct or indirect affiliations with. Yada yada. All right, so today we'll give you an overview of what we did and why. We'll talk about sort of the meat and potatoes of OSINT. Maybe before we get too much into it, does anybody here know what OSINT is or familiar with OSINT? Okay, we have a few people. Okay, great. So for those who don't, open source intelligence is what it stands for. It basically means gathering all available data from overt sources or like freely available or nearly freely available sources to dig up all the dirt you can on someone or something, some intent. We'll talk about how we started with a simple person's name, an executive at our company, available on the company website, and turned that into a full dossiers of information we could find on him that we could leverage in an attack against him. And to that end, we'll talk about the evil things we did, and of course, we'll talk about what we learned and what you could probably do to help prevent this kind of thing from happening with you. So why did we do it? So executives make pretty tempting targets. What could possibly go wrong targeting executive at the company you work for who signs your paychecks, right? In all seriousness, though, executives do make very tempting targets. So both their influence, their access, frankly, their wealth. There's a lot of reasons someone might want to target an executive at a large company. We had some research time over the holidays, generally a little bit slower, and we wanted to apply threat modeling. So threat modeling is something we use in our day-to-day work as it pertains to systems we're going after. But we wanted to go through the idea of applying that to a person. So we did have some limitations. So I mentioned before, we are ethical hackers. So in short, that means we get permission before we do anything. So that said, the victim of this exercise knew it was coming, that we were going to do it, and we did get his consent before we started. We didn't want to destroy this poor person, so most of the recon we did was what I would consider fairly passive. We don't actually want to cause any real harm to him. The executive works in information security, so knows a little bit more about some of these things that we take for granted around cyber hygiene and information security. He was also remote to us, and we didn't really have any funding to travel or to do anything kind of in person. So, if we were able to travel and go in person, it would unlock a whole other layer of recon and the types of attacks we could potentially do. And we only had a week. All right, so before you take all the information we're about to tell you about this individual who we'll call Duke Johnson and use it to steal his identity, I should be very clear, everything we're about to tell you is completely fabricated. We've obfuscated all the information on the real individual with comparable information. It is all the same types of information, but it is completely fabricated, so it won't do you any good. All right, so how did we do it? I mentioned we started with this individual's name available on the company website. We knew he worked for IBM. We had a rough idea of where he lived in the country, not really, but a rough idea. It didn't prove that would be very useful anyways, having that advantage, because we figured out what exact city and state he lived in pretty quick from LinkedIn. So We'll jump forward to LinkedIn. Who here uses LinkedIn? I assume probably almost everybody, right? So LinkedIn, is the first and perhaps most obvious logical step for this kind of study when you want to find out information on somebody. People use it to market themselves and their careers, so of course it's the first place we went as well. And it was a real wealth of information, what we got there to start off with. So we figured out his email address, which we'll talk about in a minute, and why that's so important. His personal email address, we figured out the state and city where he lived, previous employers, previous colleagues, a lot of other interesting information. Notably, there was a bunch of patents this individual had filed previously. A very useful bit of information we gathered from those patents was indeed his middle initial, which proved to be very useful. One of the challenges in this kind of study is you'll have several people with the same name. So vetting which information actually applies to your target and not somebody with the same name and coming from the same area is important. So getting his middle name, initial name was an important step. So I mentioned before, the email address is an extremely important bit of information, especially the personal email address for this kind of study. It's really one of the keys to unraveling someone's online presence. So, with the email address, you can find a lot of the more obvious stuff, major social media platforms, accounts on things like Facebook and PhotoBucket and Google Plus for anyone who still uses that. We also learned that Duke frequented dog showing forums, so much lesser known. Not something that most people would go and visit, but using the email address, we were able to find accounts there pretty quickly. And with multiple platforms, you're going to have an alias now for all of these accounts on all of these platforms. So it almost becomes a rinse and repeat exercise. Now that we had the email, we got the accounts, we see his aliases. Well, where is he using those aliases? And you just kind of expand out and out to other services that this individual uses. There's a lot of free services you can use to help you with this sort of thing. We mentioned a few here. NameCheck, that's some. If you're interested in this kind of thing, ReconNG is awesome. It's probably the best open source tool available for this kind of reconnaissance. We also mentioned the OSINT framework. If you're really into this stuff, there's even full operating systems dedicated to it. So I know if there's pen testers in the room, you're probably familiar with Kali Linux. There's an operating system called Buscador that's just packed with tools for this kind of investigation, this kind of open source intelligence gathering. For any successful doxing attacks, it really does need to get personal, and that's where genealogy comes in. So, as luck would have it, one of the members in the team actually already had a paid subscription to one of these online genealogy sites. Ancestry, you've probably heard of it. We didn't have a budget, but since he already had it for personal research, why not leverage it, right? What the beauty of this kind of resource is, even if you have great cyber hygiene and you're very careful about the kind of information you put online, all it takes is one relative to have done the family research and published it all, and it's all there. So it's just a matter of typing the name in, waiting a few days for it to find all the correlations, comes back with a report with all of the family, or likely family related to you. So, we just punched in Duke Johnson in New Jersey, and within a few days we had like a couple of potential family trees. Through this we were able to basically find out everything about his family, extended family. And then you can go back to the previous step and you can expand out all the same information for them and learn even more. So we've been talking a lot about Duke, so we'll put a kind of a face to the name. So on the left here we have Duke. On the right we have his wife Joan. We have his son Wayne. His daughters Susan and Christina. And I mentioned Duke was into dog showing. That is his prize-winning Labradoodle, Smithers, if you're curious. All right, so they say a picture says 1,000 words. So if a picture says 1,000 words, what does 5 pictures do? What does 10 pictures do? What does 100 pictures do? Right? There's a lot of information in pictures people post online that they take for granted, that you might not immediately think is something you could connect if somebody wanted to come after you. But some examples of the information we found there. So starting off devices, so pictures containing pictures of the laptops, the phones. I don't know if any of you saw Kanye type his pin on national television. It's usually not that blatant, but even just finding a make and model of a device someone uses can enable a lot of technical attacks you might want to do against them. Pictures of their vehicles, you know, they want to show off their nice new shiny car. Executives have very nice cars, so that can give you the license plate. You can tie that back to the VIN and find a bunch of other information that way. Confirmation of the layout of someone's house. Sorry, we have a question? No?
Image metadata?
Yeah, we're getting the image metadata. It's in a later slide, but yeah, absolutely. You know, through other sources, we did find information about the layout of this individual's house, so it confirmed where things were. So if you wanted to do a more physical type of attack, everything from basically breaking into someone's house, just to figuring out where they might leave things when they're out of town, if you want to come in and compromise something in their house, that's helpful for that. Lots of details around the property, so you probably don't think about it when you take a picture, but you know, if your front door and your lock's in that picture, that can also enable an attacker in knowing what kind of locks you have from a remote location before they go there. I know some people in this space also like lockpicking, so that's an interesting exercise. We also learned a lot about what Duke liked to do, what his hobbies were, what kind of bands he liked. There's a lot of kind of personal information that could be leveraged in a social engineering attack as well. A lot of companies that Duke worked with or had affiliations with, again, would be very useful in a number of different social engineering attacks. We even found a picture of a tattoo that he didn't show off. So I know from a professional level, some people, if they got that tattoo when they were younger, they don't necessarily like to show it off to everybody in a professional setting. So it's also useful if you have a partial photo of someone in a crowd and you're kind of trying to verify who that is. You know, distinguishing marks like a tattoo could be very useful to identify. Notably, you know, a lot of this is just everyday posts that people put up there and never take down. It just stays there forever. So, wealth of information from photos. So this is a street view, actually. So I mentioned we had his address. So of course, what do? Let's go see what his house looks like, right? So we go there, and as luck would have it, there was a HVAC company doing some work on Duke's house when the street view cameras rolled by. So this gives us even more information. Now we know another business that he does business with. So you know, if we wanted to do a social engineering attack, come in and say, "Hey, I'm Bob from the air duct cleaning service or whatever." There's all kinds of other bits of information you can use here to use in an attack. And with that, I'll hand it over to Chris, who will talk to us about Pokemon, I think.
Yes.
Everybody, we're going to get this out of the way. All right. Okay, so I don't know, show of hands, who knows about Have I Been Pwned? Perfect. I don't need to tell you guys about this. Obviously, you can look anybody's information up on there, so we did. We found a ton of dumps that his data, email address, that kind of thing, his accounts were part of. And the interesting thing for us was, this sort of took me personally on a little bit of a sidetrack. Marketing dumps. We don't think of marketing profiles because it tends to be out there as like, oh, these are anonymous data sets are fine, whatever. It's not really true. So if you have developed a little bit of a profile on somebody's life and you get a ton of marketing data for people who live in the area of, say, Springfield, New Jersey. In this case, we use the example of Homer Simpson. If you live in Springfield, you have 3 children, you work for a utility, and you drive a Plymouth Drunk-Corolla, you're probably Homer Simpson. We can be reasonably sure. That's not the interesting part, though. The interesting part is you take that information and look at what else is in the marketing profile for the person. So, oh, this person happens to love Stephen King, or things like that. So there's some information you could potentially find. Now I did sort of troll around the dark web seeing if I could find any of these dumps. I couldn't. So But there's allegedly been 150 million records, unique records, leaked just from marketing sources. And that was, we probably haven't updated this slide since we presented last year at B-Sides. So no doubt that's changed. Show of hands, who understands this already? Okay, so there's some people who don't. I'm going to leave this slide up for a little bit. This was more oriented towards like a less security conscious crowd, but the key takeaway is this middle piece of neither the dark web nor the deep web are indexed, right? The reason that's significant is that you're never going to find, say, litigation records indexed by Google, because those they're not necessarily paywalled. They are in some places. But let's say you wanted to look up court records for somebody, you have to go to some archaic system that was designed in 1997. It might be Flash or Java based. You got to punch in some stuff, then you get your results. Google can't index, or intentionally doesn't index that stuff. So you want to go and do some of that research. So I'm going to go into what we found on the deep web. We didn't really touch the dark web all that much, other than to look for dumps of data that we might be able to find our guy in. So, as I mentioned, government records offices, not indexed. In our case, we found court cases for him and relatives, business filings, vehicle registrations. The scariest thing for me is this item right here. We got a land title piece of paperwork filed with the county where he lives that has his signatures and his wife's. Obviously not the actual document, but this is pretty much what we found. We also got his wife's full name from this document, which we hadn't been able to sort of track down previously. Again, if you wanted to steal his identity, pretend you're him, this is a good way to do it. You can practice his signature, make it even look more legit. The other thing we found in government records offices was land parcel numbers. Land parcel numbers are cool in a way that separates it from, you might think like, oh, you can just go look at Google Satellite View. This stuff is cool to me because you can see how everything's changed over time. There's a note here that we figured out roughly when he put his pool in, which kind of threw him when we told him all this information. He was just like, how did you figure that out? And I'm like, well, we just looked at photos and then these financial transactions we found, correlated the two and guessed that that was a loan to put in the pool. He thought that was a little bit too far. The other thing that you can find here is things like elevations, because obviously if you're like a city engineer, you need to be aware of floodplains and things like that and how those are changing as neighborhoods get built. So they do these maps every few years. So in the US, every state does it differently. In Canada, we use different systems. I think you can access all the information as sort of one location, but this is really cool too if you wanted to go in person and you get caught out by a neighbor poking around the guy's house. A good excuse is like, oh man, I grew up in this neighborhood and like, I don't remember these trees being there. And that sounds a lot more legit if you know those trees weren't there and the neighbor's been there that whole time, right? The other thing we did, we looked at homes for sale near where he lived. A lot of places now will list things like what your home school is, and so we know likely where his kids go to school. Kind of scary. We also know property values. He lives in a very nice neighborhood. I don't know if you can see the 1.5 million up there. Again, it's another good solid excuse to be poking around the neighborhood as just some random person who doesn't look like they belong. If you've never seen Wiggle, this is a utility that is basically Wi-Fi war driving. So you load up an app on your phone, leave it running in your car, drive around. It basically monitors every Wi-Fi network that it sees in its vicinity and ties it to the GPS location. And then, I'm not sure how people at the back can see this, but there's a line of purple dots along this road. This is a pretty major road in Duke's neighborhood. There's a lot of coffee shops and stuff on that road. Every single dot is a unique Wi-Fi SSID hit. And some of them will age out, obviously, as businesses close and that sort of thing. You can also find out a lot of residential stuff. So I didn't show it here, but we did actually narrow down that Duke's house was one of 2 Wi-Fi SSIDs from here in Ottawa, which was kind of cool to me. That's an awesome sort of citizen reporting thing. As Warren mentioned earlier, we had government records regarding his car. We were able to get, because of his plate number and the government records, we were able to look up collision history, that kind of thing. We didn't find anything because it was a very new car. But you could, on an older car, if somebody has a commercial vehicle, you might be able to look up inspection reports or whether they've had traffic tickets, that kind of thing. As Warren mentioned, really loves to show his dogs. I can't stress that enough. He might have a problem that someone needs to talk to him about. So this is a members only forum. So this is deep web, right? You can't actually see any posts until you create an account. So you think about it, there's forums like this all over the place. And this is sort of an area where you wouldn't necessarily think, like, who doesn't use Reddit nowadays, right? But he posted fairly regularly. And just poll of the room, what information do you think you can get from that? Just from knowing, like, that he posts on this forum.
That's how he goes to work.
Yes, it's cheating, you're on my team. Anybody else? Yeah?
Various events he's attending?
Yeah, that's, so yeah, we were able to,
Physical presence?
yeah, we can confirm that he was at this dog show on this date, right? Because I don't know if you can see, the bottom forum here is called Brags. This is a real website, by the way. But yeah, he would post in the bragging forum, so.
Name of his first pet.
The name of his first pet, yeah. We're gonna get into that, actually. Yeah, if your rapper name is your first street you grew up on in elementary school or something like that, and your mother's maiden name, does that sound like security credential harvesting to anybody? Or a security question?
No, even worse. I mean, with a site like this, you can predict where he will be. And
Yeah.
you can physically follow him.
Yeah, no, that's,
or put
yes.
him under
We'll
physical threats.
go into that, but yes. So we were able to get information about where he was going to be based on him making posts like, oh, I'm looking forward to seeing you, Dave, at such and such a show in 2 weeks. So we would know on a Saturday he'd be driving to Maryland or something to do a dog show. I don't know, wherever they do dog shows. Geo-tagging, as somebody, who was it that mentioned that earlier? Geo-tagging is real bad. A lot of sort of more modern phones are getting better about stripping this data out of images, but it's not 100%. The US military, there's an older article where they lost a series of attack helicopters on a runway in Afghanistan. And it was because some soldier went out and was like, haha, look at this, look at all these Apaches behind me, and took a selfie, posted it to Twitter, and then insurgents basically said, oh look, the GPS location is here. Let's go set up a mortar here and hit them from afar and just destroy 4 helicopters. Very expensive selfie. So there's also the Strava news from last year or 2 years ago, where what you can't see because this is just the heat map of runners, but if you go to this GPS location, it's just desert. It doesn't look like there's anything there, and yet there's these weird places people are running. It's all just data that's being leaked accidentally. People don't think about it. You should basically turn off location services and maybe throw your cell phone away if you're worried about this kind of thing. So we decided, okay, can we build, like, this Strava heat map looks cool, can we build something like that for Duke? Sort of watch him, like, it won't be as exact, but can we build something that'll let us watch him go about his day? So that led into this question, could we watch him drive to work? The answer is maybe. So he drives, we'll get into it, but he drives a black BMW, which in his area, because it's a nicer, like everyone drive. It's like a Honda Civic there, I guess, I don't know. But personally, like my first car was very rusty on the roof. You could have picked that out of this grainy photo, no problem. So, and you know, this isn't just New Jersey that has this. Like, we have traffic cameras all down the 417, right? That's how they do traffic reporting on the radio. Not only are there cameras on the roads, there's cameras in buildings that people just don't secure. I mean, nobody here should need to be told, but I'll tell you anyway. Don't leave default passwords on your devices. Don't put them on the internet. Just the less connectivity they have, the better. This screenshot is actually edited. I actually took a picture I was a little uncomfortable with off where this interior of a warehouse or something, a bottling plant, I'm not sure what that is. There was like a child's nursery in a home was one of the cameras. So it's like a baby cam, and there's just like a picture of someone standing there like looking in at their child. It's so I took that off. So in the last hours of our reconnaissance, one of the team members sent Duke an email. And I mean, he knew we were doing this, and he kind of was like, well, this seems obvious. So he replied and gave us his IP address, which then confirmed for us who his cell provider was, which was a bit of a, we had narrowed it down to like 2 popular ones in his area. And he didn't realize that he'd give that away just by replying from his Gmail account. So email headers are a great source of information if you can passively sort of interact with your target. You can use this same information to determine ISP, that kind of thing. This is really useful for like social engineering attacks. If you've never seen it, there's a documentary that somebody did at DEF CON a few years back called Real Future. And the episode is on YouTube, but the guy basically sits down with the people in the social engineering village, and in about 10 minutes, this woman basically takes over his AT&T account, takes over his cell account, gets his password changed, and all just by socially engineering the person on the other end of the phone at AT&T. And all she had was his phone number. Like, how? There's no security, that's how. All right, I'm gonna hand this over to Dimitri, who's gonna talk sort of more about the fun part.
Thanks a lot, Chris. By the way, guys, we'll have slides available later on. You can just download them, so you don't have to take photos of the projector. So if you consider what we've collected up until this point is really quite a lot. We had his full family information, his pets, his friends and colleagues, employers the current employer and the employers he worked for in the past, businesses he deals with, his hobbies, artists he enjoys, his assets, his home, his vehicles. We knew had a pretty good idea of what devices he used because we saw them in his photographs, certain banks and credit companies that he deals with, different locations, his home address, office address, where he travels for business and pleasure, where his kids go to school, which is kind of creepy. Also, what was his schedule like when he works, when he goes to, let's say, different forums, makes posts there, his business travel and his travel for pleasure. So really quite an interesting amount of information. When you're working with this amount of information, and especially when you're working as a team, it's very important to stay organized because it's very easy to get lost in this volume of information. And you need to track not only what you found, but where you found it, so you could go back later and maybe dig more. And also the quality of the source, because sometimes, let's say, you'll find his name somewhere, but you're not really sure if it's really him. So you need to kind of mark every bit of information you find, mark with a kind of, I guess, a confidence score, so that later on you could kind of draw conclusions based on the quality of your data. We, as IBMers, we had access to an IBM product called I2 that we used to organize this information. By the way, Garth, this is not a product plug. It's just stating the facts. There are lots of other great options. For example, there's a great free option called Maltigo Community Edition. And this is exactly the type of software that insurance companies and law enforcement and I'm guessing intelligence agencies used for exactly this type of thing, where they collect information on a person, on his other people he is related to, certain facts about his life, his assets, and kind of put it all together in this online dossier. And it really helped us because it enabled teamwork and helped us track our findings, search in them, and also kind of graph the information because it's it's one thing if you have a huge volume of text information. It's another thing entirely if you can actually create links between different people and their assets. And yeah. So that's pictures definitely worth 1,000 words. So if you kind of look back and consider information on our dossier, you have to understand that, first of all, we haven't left our desks at all, so we could have done this from anywhere in the world and collected the same amount of information. And just imagine how much more we would have found if we had a budget or were allowed to travel. So we could have, first of all, gone in person to, local government offices, looked, at various records that are offline. We could have paid for background checks. There are all kinds of companies that sell all kinds of private information on people, and you just need to pay a fee, and sometimes you need to be like a private investigator, have that license. We could have gone to his home, just surveilled the surroundings, tried to maybe connect to his Wi-Fi, and we definitely would have gotten a much clearer picture of his work situation, his daily habits. So it definitely helps if you can travel or have a budget. So then came kind of the fun part, that now that we have this wealth of information, what can we really do with it? So it was time to do threat modeling. And as Warren mentioned, we do threat modeling all the time for software, but a lot of the same techniques really apply to real people. Because this was a research project on company time, we sort of had to have some kind of a deliverable that we could show to our executives to show that we haven't wasted a week. So we developed a report that we actually will release a redacted version to the public soon. And we developed all kinds of threat scenarios that an executive could face, and also proposed mitigations for those scenarios. So this was a kind of a useful output from this activity, because our higher-ups could take that and maybe do some training for their executives, and maybe suggest certain things to avoid in their daily lives, because they are they're juicy targets. They can be under threat. And of course, the fun part was sort of to kind of play the bad guy for a day, imagine all kinds of scary scenarios somebody could do with this information. Of course, we did none of that. This is all kind of just an imaginary exercise. So the first very obvious one is identity theft. So now that we have collected all this information on this person, it's kind of easy to go and take over certain things in his life. So for example, if you're dealing with a bank or let's say cell phone company, you know that when you call them, they ask for certain bits of information to identify that it's really you that they're talking to. Now that we have collected a lot of private information on him, it's now possible to actually go and, let's say, take over his cell phone account, or maybe take a loan in his name. But there are other attacks. So one of them is what's commonly called a watering hole attack. We know the website that this gentleman visits frequently, the dog showing site. It's very easy to go and pretend to be another user and post a question there, saying that, oh, I'm also very interested in this breed of dogs that you're interested in. What can you tell us about this particular show, and link to, let's say, to malware that would infect his computer. We could do spear phishing attacks against him. We know businesses that he deals with, let's say HVAC company that you guys saw a couple of slides back. We could pretend to be from that company and say, well, we were doing this work at your house this X months ago, and there's a recall on your furnace, and let us come in and do the replacement so that the furnace doesn't fail. And by the way, to look up the furnace serial number, click on this link, and we could post a malicious link to infect his devices. What else? We could attack people that he deals with. One angle is, because he's an executive, and this is actually a fairly common thing, I guess kind of a type of spear phishing attack called whaling, where you could talk to his assistant when you know that he is unavailable. So let's say he travels to a conference or to a dog show, and you know that he will be on the plane for a couple of hours, that's your window of opportunity where you could talk to his assistant and say, well, we really need this help with this competitive bid, for example, and Duke said that it's okay if we reach out to you for help. Here's an attachment to open this document you need to review, and bam, we infect the company system through the assistant. As was mentioned here, now that we know his schedule, we could intercept him at some event and do all kinds of nasty stuff. We could steal his devices, we could plant malware on his devices when, let's say he leaves his laptop in his hotel room and goes to dinner, for example. This is something called Eagle Maid attack. We could clone his badges, all kinds of things you can do in person. And vice versa, you know that he's going to be away from his home because he announced to the world that he's traveling to this conference, for example. And you could go and break into his house and steal stuff. And the list goes on and on. It could get really dark really quickly. There's swatting and all kinds of other things a truly malicious person or group can do to this person if they're really motivated to do so. So now that we presented all of this, it seems kind of depressing. What are the possible mitigations to these dangers? The situation is not hopeless. You can become more secure than you are today by just following a few kind of obvious recommendations. So first of all, with this amount of personal information, it's fairly easy for someone to try and get into your accounts by trying to guess your passwords, because people usually are lazy about creating secure passwords. They use personal information. Knowing his pet name and other things that people usually use in a password, it's not hard to create a not really long password list that one could use in brute forcing access to his accounts. And there are actually special tools that do that. So we strongly recommend that you use two-factor authentication. That would stop those attacks in their tracks. It's probably better to use either apps that are specifically developed for two-factor authentication, Google Authenticator Duo, and there are some others, or you use a hardware two-factor authentication using YubiKey. I don't know if everybody can afford that, but it's a good hardware option. Getting a text message with a code is a less secure option because there are known attacks where malware would live on your phone and intercept that code, that verification code that was sent, and reveal it to the attacker. Or there are social engineering attacks where somebody would contact you and say that, I had this security code sent to your phone number by mistake. Would you please read it to me? So it's not ideal to use text messages as a two-factor or multi-factor authentication. Try not to reuse usernames across systems, because this is how we actually were able to kind of connect different areas of his life together. He sort of reused his email, his account names on different systems. That's an easy way to link things together. Ideally, use separate accounts for different things that you do in your life. Definitely don't reuse passwords. As we know from all these password dumps that are sold on the dark web, it's very easy for someone to get this dump, figure out your password, and then try this password on all the accounts that they know that you have. If you use your password, all of those accounts will be compromised. Of course, don't use personal information in passwords. I mentioned that. Really, the best practice is to use password managers, because they do two important things. First of all, they manage passwords in such a way that it's easy. You don't have to remember your complex passwords that you create. They store them securely. You have one really strong password to unlock the password manager, and also they can build a strong password for you. There's no guesswork. You can ask a password manager to build a really strong password that will be really hard to brute force. So it's a really good idea to use a password manager for your passwords, and there are lots to choose from. There's OnePassword, LastPass, Bitwarden, and others. They also, when you go to some website, they would fill in your credentials for you. So that's another bonus. You don't have to type your credentials. An interesting thing about security questions. You guys are probably familiar with security questions in your bank accounts, maybe, or maybe your cell phone account. Those tend to be really obvious things, like what year did you graduate from high school, or what was your first pet's name, or what city did you met your partner in. So, as you know, as you can see now, this is the stuff that's very easily discoverable if somebody's trying to dig up information on you. So the recommendation is to actually rely on your security questions. Because these companies don't care. They just need some string from you that's the answer to a particular security question. So if you come up with something that's not the real answer and just keep track of it somehow so that you don't remember, you should be in good shape. Nobody could guess that. Protecting your device is probably the most important thing you can do, is keep them up to date. As pen testers, day in, day out, we live on bugs that we discover. There's no magic about what hackers do. They exploit either misconfigurations or bugs in software. And responsible companies, when these bugs are reported to them, they issue updates. If you don't apply these updates, then it's kind of a losing battle. But companies like Microsoft and Apple and others, they regularly issue software updates. They're a nuisance to deal with. Nobody probably likes to deal with these updates, but it's a really good idea to apply them as soon as you get them, because that's how you will protect your devices from compromise. This includes all your software and actually your router. Your router is going to be the high-speed router that connects you to the internet. It's the gateway into your home. If that gets compromised, they can jump on your devices in your house. So it's really important to update firmware on your router, and if you don't know how to do that, your internet company can probably help you with that. You cannot predict, prevent all the bad events that can happen. So it's important to be prepared for the negative events. So backing up, you probably heard this 1,000 times before, but backing up your data could be a lifesaver. If, let's say, your machine gets infected with a ransomware and there's no way to recover, you lose all kinds of important stuff. Let's say your baby's pictures, or some kinds of important documents. That could be lost forever if you don't have a backup copy. And storing your important files either offline or sometimes encrypted in the cloud is a good option. It's better to be prepared. When you install the apps on your mobile devices, look at the permissions. Sometimes they ask for too much. Let's say you would go and install a flashlight, and it would ask for access to your messages and your contacts and all kinds of stuff. Steer clear of apps like that. Look for an option that asks for as few permissions as possible. It's a good idea to either not plug into your IoT devices in the home into the internet, or into your local network, or have them access internet, or if you do, maybe segregate that from your personal devices, because very often these devices do not get updated, do not get firmware updates, even though security vulnerabilities get discovered. So it's, Chris I think mentioned already, password protect your devices, change the default credentials, and also try to apply updates as they're being issued. And of course, the common sense thing, ignore emails that kind of try to instill a sense of urgency and ask you to click on links to do something, or open attachments. I literally, once a week, I get an email from someone close to me, my friend, with a malicious link or a malicious attachment. And it's not because they sent it to me, it's that because somebody is spoofing their account to get to me and get me to click on a malicious link. And that's just, it's common sense. You have to kind of think twice before you click on any link anybody sends to you. Finally, as far as protecting yourself, lock down permissions on your social media. It's very important because for research like this, it was crucial that we could see a lot of information in Duke's social media accounts. His kids were actually much better. We could collect much less information on his kids because they knew to lock down their social, social media accounts. It's a good idea to maybe look back through your social media posts and clean up, because there's a chance that maybe you're revealing something either in the posts or in the pictures or in the videos that maybe you don't want to reveal. We know that internet remembers everything, but I think that applies more to something that some powerful intelligence agency may track. Let's say if you're dealing with just petty criminals and they cannot look back through your social media history and pick up some photo that reveals something private about you, that's probably good enough. Like, we know NSA probably has a copy of that photo, but it's it's the common criminals that we're trying to protect ourselves from. Do not announce to the world when you're traveling. Should be common sense. When you're telling everyone in the world where you will be at a particular moment, that's an invitation to either attack you at that location or get into your home while you're away. And actually, it's a known fact that these days, if the criminal is casing a certain house they want to get into, they would actually try and troll the social media accounts of people that live in that house to figure out their travel plans. Sorry.
Isn't that a losing battle nowadays? People are obsessed with Instagram and Facebook. It's kind of like a losing.
It is.
They brag. I mean, I have people on Facebook and they post, "Oh, Dubai, look at me,
yes,
fancy lifestyle."
Yeah,
like,
that's
Vegas,
very true. But this is a choice you make. Like I do not announce my travel plans to anyone. So it's kind of hard for people. Well, it's not impossible, but it's harder, I would argue, to figure out where I will be from my online presence. Chris mentioned online social media quizzes. There are all kinds of sneaky tactics that marketers use to get all kinds of personal information on you, like if the rapper name, or there are all kinds of funny quizzes on the web. Beware of those that ask you to reveal personal information. That's nobody's business. Turn off Geo-Tagging that I was mentioned, and it's gotten better with the modern phones. Visiting links, this sort of also speaks to clicking on links that somebody sends you. It's better to go direct to the company's website rather than to click on the link that somebody sends you. A case in point, I don't know if you have gotten those calls, but I've gotten at least one call recently from CRA saying that I owe some money on my taxes, and like a really nasty, scary message from some RCMP officer saying that I'll be in jail if I don't pay taxes to this shady account. So this is sort of similar. Do not believe calls like that. Go and actually talk to CRA directly to confirm whether there's really an investigation opened against you. So that kind of speaks to this bullet point. As far as
don't trust the caller ID info.
yes, that's true. Yeah, that is easily spoofed. Yeah,
For
apparently.
example, as an Ottawa.
Yep.
613.
Or a CRA number even.
Yes, yeah, that's true. As far as being prepared, let's say something does happen and somebody takes, let's say, a loan in your name or does something like that. Having routine credit reporting, credit checking is a good idea. And also, just kind of stop and think before you sign up for free anything on the internet, because as they were saying that if you're not buying the product, you are the product. Your personal information is the product that the company in question is getting. If you're more paranoid, you're more security-minded, there's even more stuff that you can do, like you can, completely segregate your online presence in the different areas. Do not cross-share, cross-reference anything, because actually that's another way of linking different accounts together, whether the same link was shared from different seemingly unrelated accounts. Disabling all location tracking, when you use something cloud-based, you're exposed, but good luck giving that up. setting up and using VPN connectivity is a really good idea, because when you're connecting from, let's say, Starbucks or McDonald's, it's very easy to get compromised. Using Tor for routine browsing, that's it's a good idea. So, like if you're completely paranoid, you want to stay completely secure, that's probably either unattainable or that calls for you living just in a cave somewhere, completely off the grid. So I don't know if it's a realistic option for our modern life. But to kind of wrap up, it seems that very daunting, very scary, depressing. That and if you want to be completely secure, completely anonymous, it requires extraordinary efforts. It can be done, and it's being done by, let's say, some high-risk categories of people. Let's say investigative journalists, or people hiding from ex-partners who are violent, or intelligence agents. It is theoretically possible, but it just requires extraordinary amount of effort. The good news is that really the average person like you and I really don't need to go to such lengths. We really need to bring that risk just down to a manageable level. And it's the same as with other things in our lives. You cannot be guaranteed to be, let's say, completely healthy throughout your life. But if you do certain right things, you bring the risk of illness down to a manageable level. Let's say you live a healthy lifestyle, you don't smoke, you don't drink. If you do certain right things, the risk of becoming ill becomes manageable. And it's the same thing with with crime, with accidents, etc. Same thing with cybersecurity. While it's very hard to completely eliminate the risk, you could follow these things that we outlined to bring it down significantly. Criminals are very often opportunists. They go after the lowest hanging fruit, after the easiest target, just like lions go after the weakest gazelle in the herd. They will not chase the strongest, the most powerful one. They go after the easiest target. So if you cease being the slowest gazelle, you're probably in a good shape. So that concludes our presentation. These slides are available here. You can scan the code if you dare.
Totally safe, I swear.
There are a few pages of links following this, and also some book references. There's some really good books on how to reduce your online profile, or even to stay completely anonymous. There are certain people that have been able to achieve that. It requires amazing amount of effort, but it is theoretically possible. So with that, I'd like to thank you, and if there are any questions.